My name is Lucille Prosser. I'm 43 years old. I was standing in my grandmother's dining room on Christmas Day with a hot roasting pan in both hands when my husband raised his glass and told 8 people we were selling the house. We're putting this place on the market in the spring. It's too much house for 2 people. It's time. He said it kind. That's the part I need you to hear before anything else. He said it the way a man says a thing he's already grieved on your behalf, with his glass up and his other hand flat on the table, and my mother-in-law made a small sound like somebody had set down a weight. It was not his house. It has never been his house. The only name on that deed is mine, and it's been mine since I was 26, and the deed wasn't the part that mattered, and I'll get to that. Nobody argued. Kirby said something about the market. Dawn asked if we'd looked at anything yet. My neighbor, Elmer Fickes, who's 79 and has eaten Christmas dinner in that room for 11 years, put his fork down on the cloth and didn't pick it back up. And I stood there holding a pan that was burning through the towel. I looked at a table of people being decent about somebody else's future, and I thought about the coat on the hook by the back door. There was a folded page in the pocket of it. 1 page. I'd driven 26 miles to Cobb's Run on the 19th to get it, and I'd carried it around for 6 days, and on that page was a photograph of the table they were all eating on. Welcome back to Porch Stories, where a woman who kept quiet for 14 years to keep the peace finds out what her quiet was paying for. If you've ever been told a decision about your own life, in the plural, in front of company, in a voice too warm to fight, you already know how loud a room can get without anybody raising anything. Tell me about yours in the comments. I read all of them. Then subscribe, because the truck was already scheduled, and I was the only one at that table who knew it. Let me take you back to September, when my life was small and mine, and I'd have told you it was good. I live in Ellsworth, Pennsylvania, in a 2-story brick house on Row Street that my grandmother bought in 1954 with money she made off other people's furniture. Her name was Lucille Prosser. She died in 2011 at 84, in the front room, in a chair I had rebuilt for her 2 months before, and I was there. She raised me from 9, and what she gave me was not sentimental. She gave me a house and a trade, and a set of hands that know things my mouth can't say. The trade is upholstery. I strip furniture down to the frame, and I build it back. Springs, webbing, burlap, cotton, horsehair when I can get it, and then the skin goes on last. It is the last thing anybody sees, and the least important thing in the whole job. Here's the entire trade in 1 sentence, and my grandmother said it to me when I was 11 with a tack hammer in her mouth. Anybody can tell you what a chair looks like. Our whole business is what's inside it. She's been dead 14 years, and I still hear that in the voice she used for customers, which was a different voice than the one she used for me. The shop is the building out back. Concrete block, 1 window, a propane heater that ticks. Her sign is still bolted over the door, painted wood. White letters on green, B. Prosser, upholstery, and caning, and I never took it down and put mine up because I liked walking under her name every morning. That is not a metaphor. I liked it the way you like a hot shower. There's a gray cat out there named Cinder. She's about 9, and she came with the building. Cinder has 1 rule she has kept her whole life, and it's this. She will not sleep in a finished chair. Only open ones. If a piece is stripped to the frame with the webbing off and the guts showing, she'll be curled in the middle of it inside 4 minutes. Put the deck back on, and she won't look at it again. Shauna says it's because the open ones are warmer. I say Cinder just likes to know what she's sitting on. Shauna Conaghy is 19, and she's been my apprentice since the June she graduated. She showed up at the shop door with a kitchen chair. She'd recovered herself in a fabric that was wrong for it, and she'd done the corners right, which almost nobody does the first time, and I asked her who taught her, and she said YouTube and her aunt. She's got a laugh you can hear from the road. She pulls tacks faster than I do, and she isn't careful with her hands, and I've told her about that twice, and I'll tell her about it again. Across Row Street is Elmer Fickes, 79, widowed since 19, And he keeps a burn barrel and a snowblower and a running argument with the borough about his hedge. He plows my drive without being asked and gets insulted if you offer him money. So, what I do is recover his recliner every couple of years and refuse to write him a ticket. And we've had that arrangement so long, neither of us remembers who started it. He grows peaches and he cans them, and every Christmas he brings a quart jar and sets it by the door like a man leaving a horse outside a church. That's most of the good part of my life, and it fits in about 400 feet. Now, my husband and I need to do this right. Because if I make him a villain from the first sentence, then none of the rest of it'll land the way it landed on me. Doug Brubaker is 46, and people like him. Not the way people like a big personality. The way people like a man who shows up. Doug is the one who drives out at 11 at night when your car quits on Route 14. Doug remembers that your sister had the surgery. He'll sit at a kitchen table for 2 hours with a woman who can't decide what to put on her husband's stone, and never once look at his watch, and then drive back out the following week when she changes her mind about the dates. He doesn't tell you about any of it after. He runs Brubaker Monument Works, out on 14 past the fairgrounds, headstones. His father, Alvin, started it in 1961 in a building he rented and never bought, and it's a low white shop with a gravel lot and rows of blanks standing up in the weeds like a town that hasn't been written on yet. Doug has a habit I've watched him do for 14 years, and I could pick him out of a crowd by it. When he's thinking, his thumb lays out letters. He'll be sitting there listening to you, and his right thumb moves in little blocks on his knee, spacing something out. His father taught him to lay out a name so the middle of it sits dead center, and Doug can look at a stone from 30 feet and tell you the layout's off by 1/8 of an inch, and he can't stop doing it, and I used to watch him do it in church. We met in 2010 at a viewing, both of us there for somebody else. He was in a suit that didn't fit anymore, and I was 28 and had been crying about a man who didn't deserve it. And Doug got me a paper cup of coffee and didn't ask me one single question. And then he asked if I was the one who did the chairs, because the funeral home's parlor chairs had been done by my grandmother in 1988, and he'd noticed the caning. He noticed the caning. At a viewing. That was it. That was the whole thing. We married in 2011, 4 months after Beulah died, in the backyard on Rowe Street, with 30 people. He moved into her house because it was there and it was paid for. And I want to say this plainly. He never once acted like that bothered him. Not once in 14 years did he make a joke about living in his wife's grandmother's house. Other men would have. He didn't. I got the Brubakers in the deal. And I got the better end of it. Joyce Brubaker is 71, and she's the reason I know what a mother-in-law is supposed to be. She never gave me one instruction about her son, not one. She brings her rolls to my house in a pillowcase to keep them warm, which is a thing her mother did, and she has never accepted a ride home, even in ice. Kirby is 49, Doug's older brother, drives a beer route, married to Dawn, who's 47 and does medical billing, and says exactly what she's thinking at a volume that has gotten us thrown out of one restaurant. Their boys are Wyatt, 15, and Toby, 11. Toby is the one who asks you a question and then stands there and waits, which I've found almost no adult can tolerate. 14 Christmases in my grandmother's dining room. Same 9 or 10 people, same table, and every one of those years I set it with Beulah's cloth, and Joyce brought the rolls in a pillowcase, and Elmer left a jar of peaches by the door. I'm telling you all this because in a minute I'm going to tell you what my husband did, and I want it to cost you something to hear it. It cost me. Alvin Brubaker died in 2019. 74. It was fast, 6 weeks between the word and the funeral, and Doug had only just started going out to the shop again on Saturdays after about 10 years of not. That's a thing about them I didn't understand for a long time. Alvin never let Doug in the shop as a boy, not out of cruelty, out of some old idea about a son not having to do what the father did. Doug spent his 20s selling farm equipment and hating it, and then at 36 he started stopping out at the shop on Saturdays, and Alvin taught him layout and taught him to cut letters and they had about 2 good years of it before the 6 weeks. So when Alvin died, Doug took the shop. Of course he did. It had his name on the door twice, once for his father and once for himself, and he never once said out loud that he was going to keep it going, because saying it would have made it a decision, and it wasn't a decision. It was just what happened next. He was happy out there. That belongs in here too. For a couple of years, he came home with granite dust in the creases of his neck, and he was happy. Here's the sentence I want you to hold, because it comes back at the end, and it comes back in his mouth. First year we were married, I put a glass down on Beulah's sideboard without a coaster and left a ring on it, and I sat on the kitchen floor and cried like somebody had died. It's a walnut sideboard with a gallery rail my grandmother refinished twice. Doug came in and sat down on the floor next to me, in the doorway, and didn't say the thing everybody says, which is that it's fine. He said something better. There's nothing in this house worth more than the people sitting in it. I've thought about that sentence about 9,000 times since the 19th of December. It was a good sentence. He meant it. He meant it the way you mean a thing you say to a woman crying on a kitchen floor. And it was true when he said it, and he was still saying it 14 years later with a completely different set of facts underneath it. Here's where it started. And it started with the cat. Second week of September. Warm still. I had Beulah's chair in the shop, the little armless slipper chair she died in, because the webbing had gone soft under the deck and it was riding low on the left. 20 minutes of work. I've done it 4 times. I stripped the bottom and turned it over onto the horse, and Cinder came and got in it before I had the burlap off, which is her whole personality, and I got my flashlight and put it on the frame to read my own note. Because that's the other thing my grandmother taught me, and it's the thing this whole story turns on, so I'll say it the way she said it. You sign the inside. Pencil, on the rail, where the deck covers it. Your name, and the month, and the year. You do it because in 40 years somebody is going to open this chair up, and that person has a right to know who was in there last. I rebuilt that chair in March of 2019, 41 hours. It's the only piece I ever kept a log on because it was hers and I was showing off for a dead woman. I put 8-way hand-tied springs back in it when I could have put a deck spring in and nobody alive would have known. 41 hours. I signed it. L. Prosser, March 2019, on the left rail, in carpenter's pencil, in my handwriting. It wasn't there. I want to tell you exactly what a person does in that moment, because it isn't what you think. I did not get cold. I did not know anything. What I did was decide I was wrong. I turned the chair around and checked the right rail. I checked the front rail. I got a rag and wiped the frame down, thinking dust. I got the good flashlight out of the truck. I checked the back, and I checked under the arm blocks, and by then I was down on the concrete floor with my cheek on it, and Cinder had left, and my hands had started to know something my head was still arguing with. Because it wasn't just the pencil, it was the springs. There were no hand-tied springs in that chair. There was a Marshall unit and about 1.5 inches of foam, which is a fine way to build a chair, and it isn't how I built that one. The tacks were staples. The burlap was a poly blend. The frame was walnut, and it was the right shape, and it was the right age, and it wasn't my grandmother's chair. It was a very good match. Somebody had spent real time finding it. Same silhouette, same wood, same era, and if you sat in it, you would never know. And I know that because I had been sitting in it since some point I couldn't name. I sat on the shop floor for a while. It got to be 5 o'clock, and Shauna came in to put her tools up and found me sitting there and asked what was wrong, and I said the webbing, and she asked if she should just go ahead and do it, and I told her no. That was the first lie I told anybody, and I told it to a 19-year-old, and it was about webbing. Here's what I thought that night, in order, because I've gone back over it 100 times looking for the moment I should have known. First, I thought somebody had stolen it. Then I thought that made no sense. Because a thief takes a chair, a thief doesn't bring you a different chair. Then I thought about the insurance, and I thought about the police, and I got as far as the number on my phone. And then I thought, I don't want to be the woman who calls the state police about a chair and then finds out she moved it herself. Because that's what your mind does. It makes you the problem. It's cheaper, so I decided to check one more thing first. Beulah's sewing rocker lives in the front room by the window. Low back, no arms, a caned seat she'd re-caned herself in the 60s. I turned it over on the rug at 10 o'clock at night with the flashlight in my teeth. Machine cane, spline groove routed out with a bit. My grandmother hand-caned that seat, hole by hole, and I have a photograph of her doing it. I put it back down, and I sat in the dark front room in a chair that wasn't my grandmother's chair, in a house where my grandmother had been dead 14 years, and I still didn't think of my husband. That's not innocence. That's how it works. Your mind will go to burglars and dementia and 100 impossible things before it'll walk down its own hallway. Over the next 4 evenings, I went through that house on my knees with a flashlight while Doug was at the shop. I'm not going to do all 8 for you, one at a time. I'll do it the way I wrote it on the legal pad, which is the way you'd walk through, because I found out later that's the same order somebody else had walked it. Front room. The sewing rocker. Wrong. The mahogany whatnot shelf in the corner, gone entirely, replaced by a plant stand I had never seen in my life and had walked past for I don't know how long. Dining room. The 2 Carver chairs at the ends of the table. Wrong. Right shape, wrong feet. Beulah's had ball feet with a scar on the front left, where a dog had chewed it in 1960-something. Upstairs hall. The blanket chest. Wrong. Wrong lock plate. Back bedroom. The washstand with the marble top. Gone. There was a different washstand there. Same marble color. 8 pieces in a house I've lived in since I was 9. I couldn't tell you when a single one of them changed. Do you know what that does to a person? I make my living off exactly this. I can walk into a stranger's house and tell you what came from where, and what got recovered in the 70s, and which chair somebody's uncle ruined with a nail gun. It's the one thing I'm good at. And somebody had been rotating my grandmother's house out from under me a piece at a time, and I had walked past it every day, and I had sat in it, and I had eaten off it, and I had never once looked. He knew that about me. That's the thing that got me later, and it's still the thing. He didn't sell what I wouldn't notice. He sold the things he knew I loved so much I'd quit looking at them. If you have ever been the one person in your family who knows what everything is worth, and then found out you were the last one to know something about your own house, tell me in the comments. Because I have never felt smaller in a building I own. And if you're new here, take a second and subscribe, because what I found next was stuck to the underside of the table we ate Christmas dinner on. The dining table came from Beulah's mother, walnut, 2 leaves, about 1911, and it isn't a valuable table. I'll put that up front, because it matters later that none of this was ever about money. $400 on a good day? On the 4th evening, I got under it. There was a sticker on the underside of the leaf, round, about the size of a quarter, white with a black number printed on it. 114. Not handwritten, printed. And I knew what it was before I let myself know what it was, because I've been going to sales in 3 counties since I was a child holding my grandmother's hand, and that's a lot tag. I lay on the floor under my own dining table with the flashlight on that number for a good while. I didn't cry, I just didn't get up. The thing about a lot tag is it means the piece has been catalogued. It doesn't mean somebody's thinking about it, it means it's in a sale. I went through the rest of the house that night with the flashlight, and I found 11 more. The sideboard with the water ring, 111. The bed in the back bedroom, the one my grandmother died in, that her husband bought in 1949, 119. The kitchen safe. The hall tree. The wardrobe upstairs. The pie chest. 12 tags. And I stopped counting at 12 because I got to the doorway of the shop and put my hand on the frame and didn't go in. Because the last thing I wanted in this world was to point a flashlight at the back of my grandmother's sign. Then I went in. 137. Now, there's exactly one place in this part of the state, a house full of 19 teens walnut goes, and I didn't have to detective anything to find it, because I've been in the building maybe 200 times. Trossel Auction Gallery, Cobb's Run, 26 miles east. Lavina Trossel runs it, and her father ran it. And it's a pole barn with a gravel lot and a snack counter that sells hot dogs on sale days. I drove out on Friday, the 19th of December, and you ought to know what I thought I was doing, because I wasn't going out there to catch anybody. I was going out there because I had 12 numbers in my phone, and I wanted a woman I trust to tell me they meant something else. Lavina's about 65 and built like a fence post, and she has a voice from 40 years of talking over a crowd. She was in the back with a clipboard when I came in, and she was glad to see me the way people are glad to see somebody they only see at sales. I asked her what a white round tag with a printed number meant. She said it means it's in a catalogued sale. Handwritten's a consignment lot, printed's catalogued. They print the sheets off the computer now. I asked her if she had a catalog for the January sale. And here's where I want to slow down, because this is the part people get wrong about how a thing like this actually comes apart. Lavina Trossel did not lean in. Lavina did not squint at me and lower her voice. Lavina Trossel handed me a catalog off a stack of about 200 sitting on a folding table by the door, the way she has handed one to every human being who has walked through that door since October, because that's the entire business. She said the January sale was a good one and there'd be coffee, and then she went back to her clipboard, and she did not know one thing, and she did not do one thing wrong. Nobody helped me. Nobody tipped me off. I went and sat in my truck in a gravel lot with the engine running and the heat on, and I read a book about my own house. Winter Estate and Household, January the 9th, 10A. 51 pages, stapled, black and white photographs, 4 lots to a page. Lots 101 through 141 came out of a private residence in Ellsworth. There were 41 of them, and they were in order. Not catalog order, walking order. Front room, dining room, kitchen, upstairs hall, back bedroom. Somebody had walked my house with a clipboard, room by room, in the order you would actually walk it, and written it all down. Lot 111 was the sideboard, photographed against the dining room wallpaper my grandmother hung in 1978. Lot 119 was the bed. Lot 137 was a painted wood trade sign, B. Prosser Upholstery and Caning, early 20th century, $200 to $350. Photographed bolted to the shop building with the propane tank in the corner of the frame. And on page 29 was Lot 114. Walnut extension table with 2 leaves, Pennsylvania, about 1910. Estimate $400 to $600. The photograph was taken in my dining room. Not against a wall at the barn. In my dining room, from the doorway to the kitchen, at the exact height a person holds a camera, and you can see the window behind it, and you can see out the window, and there's snow on Elmer Fickus's woodpile across Row Street. There was 1 week of snow before that catalog went to print, Thursday the 13th of November through about the 18th. On Thursday, the 13th of November, I was in Cobb's Run all day doing the seat frames at the Oddfellows Hall, and I didn't get home until after 6, and Doug had made spaghetti. Somebody stood in the doorway of my kitchen with a camera while I was 26 miles away, and then that night I came home and ate spaghetti at that table with the man who let them in. At the bottom of every page in that catalog, in 6-point type, is a standing footer. Every page, it says, Lots 101 through 141, property removed from a private residence, Ellsworth. On-site removal, December 26th. Preview, January 7th and 8th. December 26th. I read that footer probably 11 times sitting in that lot. Not because I didn't understand it, because I did. And because understanding it meant understanding that Christmas dinner was already on the calendar at my house. And my husband knew both dates, and he hadn't moved either one. He was going to let 8 people eat Christmas dinner on a table that had a pickup time. Before I left, I did one more thing, and it's the thing that put a number on it. There's a corkboard by the loading door at Trossel's, where they staple the results sheets after every sale. Public. They've done it 40 years. Anybody can stand there and read what everything brought. I read October, and I read November. October, Lot 62. Walnut slipper chair, upholstered. $110. 41 hours, 8-way hand-tied. My name in pencil on the left rail. $110. I stood at that corkboard in my coat and read 15 lines and wrote them on the back of my hand because I didn't have anything else. The whatnot shelf, 95. The washstand, 140. Beulah's mother's dresser, which I hadn't even missed, 225. The sewing rocker, $60. $60 for a chair my grandmother caned by hand with a photograph of her doing it. 15 pieces out of that house since the 1st of October, $3,180. I got in the truck and drove 26 miles home and made dinner. If you have ever added up what somebody took from you and found out the number was insulting, that they didn't even get much for it, put a word in the comments, because that number is its own particular kind of wound and I had never once run into it before that Friday. And if you're staying for what a man will burn down to keep a name on a building he doesn't own, hit subscribe now, because the why is worse than the what. I didn't confront him that night. I know what that costs me with some of you. I'll tell you exactly why in a minute, but first, I had to know what it was for, because $3,000 isn't a girlfriend, and it isn't a habit, and it isn't a boat, and I've been married to that man for 14 years and there's nothing wrong with him. So on Monday the 22nd, I drove out to 14 with a thermos. I've done that maybe 40 times over the years. There was nothing to it, and nobody out there would have thought one thing about it. Bud Spiker has cut letters at Brubaker Monument Works since 1974. He's 72. Alvin hired him at 21 out of a body shop, and Bud has done every stone that place has produced for 51 years, and he does the layout by hand with a rubber stencil and a knife, and he will tell you the machine does it faster and worse. Bud was in the shop alone, with the heat off and his coat on. Here's what I saw, and I want to give it to you the way I got it, which was one thing at a time and not fast. The sandblast cabinet was covered. There was a tarp on it, and the tarp had dust on top of the dust, and that's a piece of equipment you use every single day if you're running a monument shop. There were 3 stones in the shop. 2 of them had been there in April, and I know that because I'd been out with a thermos in April. The order book on the desk was open, and I didn't read it, and I didn't have to, because the shop calendar on the wall was still on October. I asked Bud how it was going. Bud Spiker isn't a man who lies, and he's also not a man who volunteers. He said it was slow. I said, how slow? He looked at the stones for a while. He said the granite people put them on cash before delivery in May. That is the whole sentence. If you've never dealt with a supplier, cash before delivery is what happens after they've stopped believing you, and it's the last stop before they stop answering. I asked him if he was getting paid. He said Doug gets to him. I asked him what that meant, and Bud turned his coffee cup around a couple of times, and then he told me the truth in the smallest possible number of words, which is the only way that man has ever said anything. He said sometimes it's the 15th. Sometimes it's the end of the month. He said it's always been cash the last couple of years, and he doesn't ask. Then he said something I've thought about ever since, and I'll give it to you as his and not mine. He said Alvin hired him when he was 21 and had nothing, and he isn't going to be the last one out the door. He said that like a man, stating a preference about lunch. He wasn't doing it for Doug. He wasn't doing it for me. He had his own reason, and it was 51 years old, and it had nothing to do with anybody in my family. I drove home and I sat in the shop with Cinder, and I did the arithmetic I could do from the outside. And then over the next 2 days, the rest of it came to me, the way things come to you in a small town, which is sideways and by accident. The building on 14 has never been Brubaker's. Alvin rented it from the Hoffer family in 1961 at some number that would make you laugh. And it's $650 a month now. I know that because the Hoffer girl works at the pharmacy, and she's the kind of person who says things. The sandblast cabinet was bought new in 2021, financed. And I know that because I signed nothing, and it isn't my debt, and it came to my mailbox anyway, in an envelope from a leasing company in Ohio, addressed to Brubaker Monument Works at our house, because a man who has stopped opening his mail at work starts having it sent home. I did not steam that envelope open. It came unsealed at the corner the way they do. $8,400 and some cents. 11 months behind on the building. $7,150. The granite account, $6,850. And that one I learned in the worst possible way, which is that I already knew it. Because in June, Doug had said the word Vermont on the phone in the kitchen in a voice I'd never heard him use, and I had decided it was none of my business. $22,400. That's it. That's the whole thing. That is what my grandmother's house was being carried out the back door for. $110 at a time. And here's the arithmetic that took the wind out of me. And I did it at the kitchen table on the 23rd with a pen. And then I did it again because I thought I'd made a mistake. 15 pieces sold. $3,180 in. And in that same stretch, 2 more months of rent went on. So the $22,400 in the spring was, by Christmas, right around $20,900. He sold 15 pieces of my grandmother's house and moved the number $1,500. The January sale would have brought $9,000 to $13,000 at estimate. It would not have covered it either. Nothing in that house would have covered it. He was not solving anything. He was feeding something. Let me do right by my husband for a minute, because a man who's only a monster is a man nobody has to think about, and I've had to think about this one. Doug Brubaker was not stealing from me to get something. He was doing the only thing he could still reach. When you can't fix the thing, you start moving things that will move, and each one buys you a month of not saying it out loud, and the month is the whole point. The month is what he was buying. Not money, time, before he had to be a man whose father's name came off a building. Alvin never let him in that shop. He got 2 years of it at the end, and then he got 6 weeks, and then he got the keys. He had nothing of his father's except a rented building with a name painted on the door twice. And I've watched that man lay out letters with his thumb on his own knee in church, and I don't think he ever once believed the shop was his. I think he thought he was minding it. All of that is true. None of it was standing in my dining room doorway on the 13th of November with a camera. Now, why I didn't say anything for 6 days. I've been asked this by a counselor and by my mother-in-law and by myself at 2 in the morning more times than I can count, and the honest answer isn't flattering, and I'm going to give it to you anyway. I wanted him to tell me. I had it all by Friday night. I had the catalog and the results sheet and the numbers on my hand, and any reasonable person would have put it on the kitchen table Friday night, and I didn't, because there was a version of the next 14 years that only existed if he came to me first. So I gave him room, 4 times, and I counted them, and I'm going to name them because they're the part I'd want to know if this were somebody else's story. Friday night I asked how the shop was doing. He said fine. He said there were 2 stones going out after the first. Saturday, driving back from his mother's, I said the house was getting to be a lot to heat, and I left about 8 seconds of quiet after it, which is a long time in a truck. He said we'd look at the furnace in the spring. Sunday, I said I'd been thinking about redoing the sideboard. Right there, lot 111, in the room with us. He said that sounds good, honey. And Tuesday, the 23rd, at the sink, I asked him straight out if there was anything he needed to tell me before Christmas. He dried his hands, and he came over and he put his arms around me from behind, and he said no. And then he said, "We're all right, Lucille." And I stood there, in my own kitchen, and let a man who had photographed my dining room hold on to me. That's the last one. That's when I stopped. I did one piece of business in those 6 days, and it wasn't a trap, it was a price check. I called Trossel's on Monday and asked Lavina what it costs to pull a consignment before a sale. She told me straight, the way she tells everybody. The owner of the property can withdraw any time before the gavel, and there's a commission in lieu, 10% of the low estimate. She rattled it off the way you do a thing you have said out loud 400 times. $920 on 26 lots. I wrote it on the pad, and I didn't call back, and I didn't withdraw anything, and I want to say why, because it's the closest thing to a decision I made that whole week. I wanted him to be the one to pull it. Christmas Eve, I sat out in the shop until about 1 in the morning with the propane ticking and a wing chair on the horse with its guts out, and Cinder asleep in it the way she always is. And I looked at that cat sleeping in an open chair and thought about how she won't lie down in one until she has seen what's inside. I did not plan a speech. I did not invite one extra person. The 8 at that table on Christmas were the same 8 who have been at that table for 11 years. And Christmas was on the calendar before any of this started. And I did not move one thing. The only thing I did was put a folded page in my coat pocket. Christmas Day was good until it wasn't, and I need you to have that too. Joyce came at 11 with the rolls in a pillowcase. Elmer came across the road at noon and set a quart of peaches by the door and said the same thing he says every year, which is that they're not as good as last year's, and they never are, and they never were. Kirby and Dawn came at 1 with the boys. Wyatt is 15 and spent the first hour on his phone, and I don't hold it against him. Toby is 11 and he followed me into the kitchen and asked me why the good plates have a gold ring if you can't put them in the microwave, and then stood there and waited for the answer, and I gave him one. We ate it too. Ham, Joyce's rolls, the corn pudding that's Dawn's mother's recipe, and is the best thing on that table and everybody knows it. Elmer told the story about the deer in the pool. Doug carved and made the joke he makes about the electric knife. He was happy. I've gone back over that afternoon 100 times looking for the tell, and there isn't one. He was happy at my table with his mother and his brother's kids, and my neighbor and me, and I sat across from him and watched him be happy. And I haven't decided yet what to do with that. Then, between the ham and the pie, he stood up with his glass. We're putting this place on the market in the spring. It's too much house for 2 people. It's time. And Joyce, who has never given me one instruction about her son, said, "Doug, honey, that's Lucille's house." He smiled at his mother the way you smile at somebody who's behind. He said, "It's our house, Mom." He said, "It's been our house for 14 years. That's when I put the pan down and went and got my coat. Nobody said anything while I did it. It's about 9 steps to the back door and 9 steps back, and I could hear the furnace, and I could hear Toby's fork. I came back, and I stood at the end of my grandmother's table, and I unfolded one page, and I laid it face up in the middle, next to the gravy, and I turned it around, so it was right side up for Joyce. I said, "Everybody take a look at that." Then I read it out loud, because half that table didn't have their glasses. Lot 114. Walnut extension table with 2 leaves, Pennsylvania, about 1910. Estimate $400 to $600. I said, "That photograph was taken from where I'm standing. That's the window behind Kirby. That's Elmer's woodpile." Elmer Fickus leaned over and looked at the picture of his own woodpile. Then I said the other thing, and it's the only thing I did that day I would call theatrical, and I'd do it again. I said, "Reach under the table on your left, where the leaf goes in. There's a sticker on it. Everybody can reach it. And 8 people at a Christmas table put their hands underneath it." Toby found it first because he was already half under there. He said it out loud, the way an 11-year-old reads a number off a thing. 114. Nobody moved for a second. Dawn had her hand still under the table, and she took it out and looked at it. Then I did the rest of it without the page, because I didn't need the page anymore, and I walked the house out loud in the order somebody else had walked it. I said, "Lot 111 is the sideboard behind Joyce. Lot 119 is the bed my grandmother died in. Lot 122 is the pie chest in the kitchen. Lot 137 is my grandmother's sign over the shop door." And then I said the last one. "There's a footer on the bottom of every page of that catalog. On-site removal, December 26th. The truck comes at 9 tomorrow morning." Doug said my name. Then he said, "That's not Lucille. That's not what that is." And I said, "Then tell me what it is." And he couldn't, and that was the end of the first part of it. What came next took about 4 minutes, and I'll give it to you in order. He tried reasonable first. He said he was going to tell me. He said he'd been trying to tell me since October, and I said which day, and he didn't have one, because there wasn't one. Then he got wet-eyed and he went after me, which I didn't expect and which I've decided was the truest thing that happened at that table. He said, "You have no idea what it's been like out there. Not one time in 6 years have you asked me a real question about that shop." And he said, "You were never going to let me sell one thing out of this house. Not one. It's a museum, and I've been living in it for 14 years. That one landed. I'm not going to pretend it didn't, because there was about 11% of it that was true, and I've had to sit with that 11%. Then he got to the third thing, which is the one I'd been waiting for without knowing it. He put both hands flat on the table on lot 114, and he said, "It's furniture, Lucille. It's wood." And then he said it. "There's nothing in this house worth more than the people sitting in it." 14 years. He handed me that sentence on a kitchen floor when I was 29 and crying about a water ring. And he had kept it. And he brought it out at Christmas with granite dust still in his knuckles. And I don't believe for 1 second that he knew what he was doing when he said it. I said, "You're right." I said it quiet and I meant it, and the room got very still, because that isn't what anybody expected to come next. Then I said, "And you carried my grandmother out the back door in pieces to keep a dead man's name on a building we don't own." That's when Joyce Brubaker set her napkin down. I've known that woman 14 years, and I have never heard her get loud about one single thing. And she didn't get loud then. She said, "Doug." He said, "Mom, don't." And she said, "Your father closed that shop." There was a sound in that room I don't have a word for. She said it looking at the tablecloth, not at him. She said Alvin closed it in the March before he got sick. She said he sold the good saw to a man in kit tanning, and he called the granite people himself and told them he was done. And he came home and sat in the car in the driveway for a while before he came in, and then he told her he'd set it down and he was all right about it. And then in April, Doug started coming out on Saturdays again. Joyce said Alvin never told him. She said Alvin took the order book back out and put the saw money into 2 stones nobody had ordered so there'd be work in the shop. And he let his son believe it was still going because Doug had just come back and Alvin wasn't going to be the one to hand him a closed door. She said, "He didn't lose it, honey. He set it down. And then he got sick, and he never got the chance to tell you. And I have known that for 6 years, and I did not know how to say it to you." Then she said the thing that finished it. She said, "You've been keeping something alive that your father already buried, and you sold this girl's house to do it." Doug Brubaker put his face in his hands at my grandmother's table on Christmas Day, and his brother got up and went around and stood behind his chair with a hand on his shoulder, and Dawn took the boys into the front room without being asked, which I've thanked her for twice since. Elmer Fickes did not move. He sat there and he looked at the tablecloth, and he stayed. And I've thought since that staying was the whole thing he had to give, and he gave it. I did not say much after that. There wasn't much. I picked up the page and folded it back along its crease and put it in my pocket. I said, "The truck comes at 9. I'll be out here at 8. And I went out to the shop and sat with the cat until it got dark. Joyce came out after about an hour with a plate of ham wrapped in foil, and she didn't say anything, and she didn't stay. Here's the part that moves at the speed paper moves. I called Trossel's at 8:05 on the 26th and got Lavina's son, and Lavina called me back at 8:20 from her kitchen because it was the day after Christmas, and I told her the owner of the property was withdrawing lots 101 through 141 that were still on the premises. She didn't ask me one question about my marriage. She asked me for the lot numbers and my name and whether I could be there when the crew came, and then she said the commission in lieu was $920 and I could pay it at the office or mail it, and I said I'd mail it, and I did, on the 29th. The truck came at 4 minutes past 9 with 2 men in it, and I met them in the drive with the withdrawal on my phone, and one of them called the office, and then they said, "All right, ma'am," and they turned around in Elmer's turnaround and left. It took under 5 minutes. I had been braced for a war, and what I got was 2 polite men and a 3-point turn. 26 lots stayed. My grandmother's sign stayed. 15 were already gone, and they're gone. There's no getting them back. And I'm going to say that flat, because I think people want an ending where the truck comes back full. Trossels can't tell me who bought them, and I wouldn't ask them to. Doug moved to his mother's on the 4th of January. He didn't fight about it, and he didn't ask to stay, and he took 2 duffel bags and the good coat and left everything else, including the ring, on the sideboard, which is lot 111, and I haven't moved it. The lease on 14 ran out in March, and he didn't renew it. Bud Spiker retired in February at 72 after 51 years, and I went to the lunch they had for him at the fire hall, and about 60 people came, and Bud cried, and Doug didn't. Doug took the sign down himself. Nobody asked him to. He borrowed Kirby's ladder on a Saturday in March and took his father's name off a building he never owned and brought the sign to his mother's garage. And Joyce says it's still in there behind the freezer. That's the one thing in this whole story he did on his own, and I'm not going to pretend it was nothing. He drives for the county now, salt and plow in the winter, mowing in the summer. He pays me $200 a month against $3,180, and he hasn't missed one. And there's a spiral notebook in my kitchen drawer where I write the date and the amount. And I've thought about how strange it is that I keep a better book on him than his father ever kept on that shop. I looked into what it would be, legally. I'm not going to dress that up. Everything he sold was mine, from my grandmother's estate, in my name, and I sat in a lawyer's office in January and got told what my options were and what each one would take. And then I drove home and didn't do any of them. Not because I forgave him. That distinction matters to me. Because I looked at the whole thing, a police report, a hearing, Toby and Wyatt hearing about it at school, Joyce, at 71, sitting in a courtroom over a chair, and I decided that I wasn't going to spend 2 years of my one life getting $1,100 and a piece of paper that said out loud what I already knew. That's a choice, and not a virtue. Somebody else could make the other one and be right. Nothing's been filed, and he isn't living here. He calls on Thursdays, and sometimes I answer, and what we talk about is the county truck and his mother's knee. And neither of us has said the word yet, and I don't know which way it goes. Some of you need this to end with a decision in it. I know that. I've been asked. But I'm not going to sit here on a porch and tell you a tidy thing I don't have. April, and it's warm enough to work with the shop door open. Shauna took her first job by herself in March, a pair of parlor chairs for a woman in Cobb's Run, and did the corners right and charged too little. And I let her, because I charged too little for 11 years, and it's part of it. Cinder is asleep in an open wing chair about 6 feet from me, and will get out of it the minute I put the deck on. I got one thing back. In April, I was in a shop on the main street in Cobb's Run for a bolt of ticking, and there in the window was my grandmother's sewing rocker with the hand cane and the scar on the rung, marked $275. It left my house for $60. I paid the $275 and I didn't haggle, and I carried it out to the truck myself, and the woman told me it was a nice piece, and I said, yes, it is. I never found the slipper chair, lot 62. I checked the Trossel results some months, and I probably will for a while. Somewhere in this state, there's a woman sitting in my grandmother's chair, and one day, the webbing under it is going to go soft on the left, and somebody's going to strip the deck off and put a light on the frame and find L. Prosser, March 2019, in carpenter's pencil, and think absolutely nothing of it. That's all right. That's what the signature's for. You don't sign it so somebody will be impressed. You sign it so that when a stranger opens the thing up in 40 years, there's a name in there, and they know the work was done by a person. The sticker is still under the table. I could get it off in about 4 minutes, with a hairdryer and a thumbnail. I've decided against it, and Joyce asked me about it in February, and I told her I like knowing it's there. And she said that's the first thing you've said all winter that sounded like you. We had Easter at that table, 8 of us. It went fine. I used to think that a house was the part of your life other people could see, and that if you kept the visible part good enough, the rest of it would be good too. Now I know a house is the frame under the fabric, and you do not find out what somebody put in there until the day you strip it down to the wood. That's my story, a round white sticker under a leaf, a chair with my name inside it that brought $110, and a painted sign that came down off a building in March, carried by the man who put it on a list. If there's one thing in your house you would swear you'd notice missing, go put your hands on it tonight. Turn it over, look underneath. It takes 90 seconds, and I hope you feel foolish doing it. Because I didn't get to feel foolish, and foolish is cheaper than what I paid. And if you know a woman who's the only one in her family who knows what everything is actually worth, the one who can tell you where each piece came from, and who's been gone for years, send this to her tonight. She'll know why. Tell me in the comments about the thing you looked under, and whether it was still yours. I read them. And if this is your kind of story, subscribe, because I'll be here. That's all of it. Thank you for sitting with me on the porch tonight. I'll see you in the next one.